Sometimes in Photoshop, you will want to create custom shapes. And you'll be doing a lot of this if you're doing graphic design work or web design work or UX or UI design work, where you're using a lot of vector style shapes and graphics, but you might also need to use this in some of your photos if you're doing some photography. So let's take a look at how we can create shapes inside of Photoshop. So first of all, we have the Shapes tool in the toolbar off to the left. So here we have the rectangle tool with the shortcut key U, which draws rectangles. This is different than the rectangle marquee selection tool, where we use this tool to make actual selections, whereas the rectangle tool is going to allow us to draw a rectangle shape. And if we click on this, we can see other tools here: rounded rectangle tool, ellipse tool, polygonal tool, line tool, and a custom shape tool. And we'll go through a couple of these at this moment just to give you a brief overview of how these work. So basically I can just click on that and I will go ahead and draw out a rectangle. The same shortcut keys work before, where if I hold shift I'll get a squared image. So if I let go of shift I have a rectangle, and you can see the blue line. It might be a little hard to see on your screen, but there's a blue line for that rectangle. And when I release, it creates it. And it fills it in with whatever the foreground color is, or whatever color swatch I have selected. So here you can see it says fill and the color is black. And then the stroke is going to be if you had a border going around here, and there's none selected at this time. And that shows you what kind of line that would use. And it also gives you the width and height which you can manually adjust here if you would like to, making it very easy for you to change out the size of those shapes and get exact dimensions. Then there's some other buttons off to the side in the options panel for organization properties and doing things like combining shapes together or intersecting shapes and how we align them and so forth, which we'll get onto a little more later on in the course. But for right now, we can change the color of the shape. If we click on the fill, we can pick one of these colors and it'll automatically update for us, which is nice and easy. We can also do gradients and other kind of cool color effects here. So we'll just leave that here, a blue fill. Notice it's different than our foreground color swatch, which is black. So if we take and we make another rectangle at this point, it's going to color it in with that fill color, so that will override the black color that we have here. You can also see off to the right that we have some of these properties, such as its color and stroke and size and other things that you see in the options bar, where you can adjust those over in the properties tab here. Now we can also create other shapes, such as the ellipse tool if we want to make circles or ellipses. And we can do polygonal if we just want to select how many sides. So I just clicked one time, it brings up this little dialog box. We can say how big we want it, how many sides it needs to have, and if we want to smooth it. And you can create stars and do other things here if you would like to. So we'll just give a 8 sides polygon, and here we have that shape. There's also a line tool, and this will allow us to draw some basic lines. Now, the thickness of the line is going to be based on the weight when we draw it. So here it's 1 pixel, and you can hardly see it. However, if I change that to say 100 pixels, and then I draw a new line, you'll see that it's a lot thicker here. And then we have a custom shape tool. So here we have a bunch of different shapes that we could pick from, and you can always add in more later on if you want to. So we can pick, like, say, this arrow, and then whenever we draw, it'll actually draw an arrow for us. And then, of course, you can always change how big that is based on its width and height and other properties in the properties menu. So now let's take a look at another tool that is going to give you a little more freehand form. So I'm going to undo all of these real quick. So we have a nice new canvas here, and as you can see, as I'm backing through the history, it shows all the changes that we made. We're going to take a look now at the pen tool. Now the pen tool is going to make and change paths or shapes with anchor points and handles. So go ahead and select that pen tool, and at the top you'll see it's listed as a path. And we just have the basic pen tool for now. There's other pen tools and other different things we can use. And this is a shortcut key P. And what happens here is now I can click and I can draw a path and create a shape or a path based on what we're actually selecting. And what we're making here is what are called anchor points. And the anchor points will allow us to create a shape. And as you can see, I can go around and close this off, and now we have this nice shape. And we can stroke this path so that it makes a nice line around here, or we can go to the top and we can change this to a shape so that it creates a shape as we are making these points. Now look a little funny until you get around to the bottom here, and then you just click on the last point and it'll close that shape for you. However, if you are using a path, so let's select path. Another thing that you want to notice is it adds another layer over in the layers dialog box here. So it created a new shape layer, which we'll get into shapes a little more later on. Let's go ahead and just delete that for now and create a new path. So we have path selected. We're still on the pen tool, and I'm going to create points. Now, something else that you can do is, because these are anchor points, they can either be straight lines, or we can click and drag and it'll make these nice curves, and it gives us these weighted points which we can actually manipulate and move around. And that's the great thing about using shapes, is after you create them, you can go back and edit them however you see fit. So this isn't exactly perfect, but we can actually fix this up and move these points around. Now if we wanted to make a shape out of this path, we have some selections, some different selections that we have here at the top. So it says make, and we can make it a selection. And when we do that, we'll hit OK. It actually turns it into marching ants. So this is another way that you can make some really great fine-tuned selections. If we undo that, we can also create a mask, or we can create a shape. So if we hit shape, you'll see it makes what we made earlier by selecting shape first at the top and creating a shape from scratch. The only difference here is we made a path first and then made a shape out of that path. Now we can also manipulate these points, and if you see, if I hover over the points, there'll be a minus sign and a plus sign, so we can add in more points if we want to make it smoother. And again, we can click and drag and create those little handles that we can move around and manipulate the shape. And then if we hold down the control or the command button on macOS, we can actually grab these points and move them around, and we can also grab the handles. So that way we can manipulate these handles. So by holding control or command, you have the ability to actually manipulate these points and fine-tune this shape however you see fit. Now the great thing about this is that you can do that with any shapes. So if we go back to, say, the custom shape tool, we can go ahead and draw out that arrow, and then we can go back to that pen tool and we can actually manipulate the anchor points that we have here. So we can actually delete out these points, and we can move them around just like we did with the heart there in that shape. So just keep in mind that you can do this with any shapes that you create. So if you have any of these custom shapes inside of this that you add in here, you can add more later on through Photoshop and through presets, that you can manipulate all these different shapes. So it gives you a wide range of things that you can do with shapes. Now there's some other options under the pen tool. So you can see the freeform pen tool. Basically that allows me to continuously draw, and it'll try to figure out the anchor points and fill that in where necessary. We have the curvature pen tool. We can add anchors and delete anchors with these point tools, and then the convert point tool. And what that'll do is that'll convert these anchors into the ones that have the handles, so we can manipulate those. So here it's just a regular point, but if I click on it, you can see two handles pop up there, and then I can actually manipulate those handles with the convert tool. So that gives you a brief overview of how to create shapes and edit shapes inside of Photoshop, both with using the shape tool or with the appropriate pen tools. And as you mess around with those, you'll really discover that you can do a lot with them, and they are very useful when you get into things like I said, graphic design or web design, where it's very common to use these types of shapes. So I hope you enjoy it, mess around, play around with the tool, and get used to them, and we'll see you in the next video.